Hi, I'm Amy Green with Amy and Art Designs, and today I'm going to show you how to paint a mini sign. I do a lot of tiered trays and smaller shelf sitters. I'm going to show you some techniques for painting a small sign and making all these little pieces look fabulous. I'll start with the colors I'm going to use. We're going to use yellow ochre, clover, turquoise, vintage white. I've got burnt umber, but just a nice brown is what you're going to need. I used decor wax to do some aging and distressing. It's a folk art product. And then I have a black paint marker, a silver Sharpie, or you could use silver paint, and then red paint. Some other supplies I'm going to use that you may not be used to if you don't do small things are painter's tape, some makeup sponges for painting, and then I'm going to use a small piece of 320 grit sandpaper. And you're going to need a paper towel or a tack cloth to remove any paint dust when you're sanding. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so you're going to want to always protect your paint surface. I've just got a piece of cardboard. I generally like cut up my old boxes and use them for painting. Okay, so something that you might notice is that these are called score, these little lines in the wood, they're called score lines. And sometimes you'll cover these up when you paint, and other times you want them for a decorative effect. And in this case here, I do want these as a decorative effect. So instead of pushing the paint, so here I'm painting the back of the wood cutout with my, or the backer for the wood cutout with my makeup sponge. And sometimes you want these for guidelines when you're painting, but other times they are a decorative piece. And in this case, they're decorative. So I'm just putting some paint on to my paintbrush and I'm tapping the extra off. And then I'm using an up and down motion to put the paint like directly onto the wood without getting too much into those score lines. When I do, I can just clean it out with a little tool. I use a scoring and piercing tool that you can find at the Dollar Tree, but you could also use a thumbtack or anything with a sharp point just to drag through that line and pull any extra paint out, okay? And I'm going for a vintage look, so if this is not completely covered and perfect, that's okay, because I want it to look a little vintage and worn. Okay, set that aside. You want to make sure, let me show you. I'm going to take my painter's tape next, and I'm going to use it. I'm going to bend the ends underneath, okay? I'm going to take these small pieces and put them directly on here. And what this does is, one, it's going to help you not lose them. And two, it's going to make it easier to paint. Okay. So I might have needed a bigger piece of paint, but we're just going to roll with that. Okay. So, and then I'm just going to move these. Oh, let's just go ahead and paint this. I'm going to paint the Sunny Farms. This is the license plate. I need a little more paint. You can see I'm kind of pushing off the extra paint because if you have too much paint, it gets down in those. You have too much paint, it gets down in the score lines. It's better to do multiple small or thinner coats with these fine score lines if you want them to show up, as opposed to like one very heavy coat. So while we're at it, let's go ahead and paint our leaves. I'm just gonna, instead of even, I just need such a small amount of paint for the leaves that I'm gonna just go ahead and dip right here into the cap, all right? All right, so I am gonna paint the bumpers. These are the bumpers and the edges of the car, the same color as the middle of the sunflowers. So my brush is a little wet because it's the same brush. You can use a makeup sponge for this or a brush. When you're using a brush with these tiny wood cutouts, one, it takes a little longer because I would already been done if I was using a makeup sponge, but I'm going to use this brush for the sunflower petals, so I just thought I'd go with it. But you just want to lift up on the edges so that you don't get the paint all over off the tape because I want to be able to move it around while I'm painting it. So again, this has got a lot of these little score lines in there already. So that's going to darken up the center. I want to lighten this up just a little bit. So I'm going to pull some of this paint here. I'm going to mix it. I don't want it quite that. So just lighten that yellow ochre up a little bit until you got a lot of paint on there. But see how pretty that is? It's like a much better yellow for sunflowers. The less paint you have on your brush, again, the better. You can see the difference. I kind of went heavier on the paint there, and you can't see those darker score lines as much, which is okay. If you were doing a bigger piece, you could go back over that with, it would be so easy to kind of go back in and highlight that, right? But with these tiny pieces, they're designed to kind of help you without having to paint all of that detail. And we're going to go in and just paint the centers. And just kind of push the paint into those little corners. And if you want to do a little shading, you can go back and take this darker yellow ochre color just like on the very tip of your brush and just go through and kind of highlight the edges. You don't have to do this. It's going to look great without it. But if you want to make it just, just to highlight a little, the other thing you can do is go in and kind of go back over and put a little bit of this darker color towards the middle. It's not necessary. Like I said, it looks great with the way that it is. And we're going to go back and hit this with the sandpaper too. They look really, really, it just gives it a little bit of variation, okay? And just a little bit of interest. So it's up to you whether or not you want to do that step. Okay, now we're going to paint our truck. When this goes together, this is your bottom bumper. And so your tires are going to be black. We'll do those last. And I'm going to paint my truck turquoise. So I just have regular turquoise paint, but this is a little too dark for me. So I'm going to mix a little of this white in here and lighten it up just a shade. Okay, now I am going to use my makeup sponge. So I'm going to take my old makeup sponge that I used on the white. I'm going to cut the end off. And because I've got so much paint on the end of my paintbrush, I'm just going to pop it right on there. Just going to do the same technique. Now, I'm not going to, if you paint a little bit of the tires, it's okay because we're going to go back over that with white or with black, not with white. Right. Now, here's my windshield because we need to glue this back into the truck. But I'm just going to take, so for my windshield, I'm going to take a lot of white and mix it in until I get a super, super light blue for that window. And I want it, I might have just put a tiny dab of blue into the white instead of the way that I did it, but that's gonna be, it's just gonna be much lighter windshield color, okay? So window color, so, all right, we'll lighten that up quite a bit. And that's our window. And it's okay, I mean, it's a window, so if the paint has some variation in it, that's kind of good, right? So it's not a solid, it just kind of looks more windowy. All right, so when this is dry, and take your black paint marker or your black paint, whatever you want to do, and go over your tires. The black acrylic paint markers are just so quick and easy for this little job. So just remember, this is going to cover here. So you want it to go up high enough that you don't see the blue anymore, but you also don't want to go so high that you color up this far, which I don't think you would, but just if you're not used to wood cutouts, layered wood cutouts like this, just to point that out for you and help you out. And then I'm going to do these next parts after we sand it. So, because I don't want to sand back over my paint. So I'm going to take just a little bit of sandpaper. All right, so our next step is going to be to take the decor wax. If you want to do this, this is one of my favorite parts, is to distress the mini signs. If you've never used decor wax, I use it like an antiquing agent. And a little goes a long way with this, okay? So I start, and you're just going to go, and don't worry if this looks a little dark, we'll lighten it up in a minute, but I just kind of go around the edges, just kind of distressing it where someone may have touched or where it would look worn. And then we're going to go back over this with a little bit of sandpaper to lighten it up, but it just kind of gives the edges like a worn look, an antique look, okay? So you can do this with all of your pieces. You obviously don't want to do it with your brown pieces because it's not going to show, but you can just kind of hit the outside of the car with it. Like I said, a little of this goes a really long way. You could, I find it easier to apply to the cutouts with a makeup sponge, but I've used the edge of a paintbrush before. And this really works best on lighter pieces. I don't find that it on dark colors, it kind of, for me, I feel like it just muddies it up, okay? So if you also wanted to, on the tips of your sunflowers, see how nice those look? They've got a little bit of variation. And then if you wanted to, on the tips of the sunflowers, you could go in and just darken them up, see, just a little bit. And then go back in here and just kind of use the edge here. And it's okay that that's a little darker. We're going to rub it in. And it just gives it a little bit more visual interest and dimension. Let's see, I'll just show you. I just actually leave these right on here. So it doesn't show up as well, see, on the darker pieces, which is why a lot of times I just skip those. So now that that's done, we're just going to take our sandpaper, and I start with my lightest colors first. I do not use a sanding block because it's small. They're small pieces. It's painted. And when you use a sanding block, the paint dust gets embedded into the sandpaper, and it's hard to use it from one color to another. And it's also harder to use a sanding block on small pieces. So we're just going to go through, and I'm just using light pressure across here. And you see how that when you sand the decor wax down, it changes and it looks more like the wood is kind of peeking through. Okay. So we're going to go over these pieces lightly. And then I'm just going to finish sanding the rest of my pieces. When you paint, this is wood, not MDF. So MDF is a different product that you can use, but this is wood, and the grain pops a little. So the sanding gives you a really nice smooth finish. Okay. And I use 320 grit, which is very, very fine sandpaper. And it's just gonna take the very top layer off and give you an ultra smooth finish, okay? Okay, before we seal this, I want to go in and I'm going to use a Sharpie. You can paint this or use a Sharpie, but a Sharpie works really, really well. I don't so much like the black Sharpie because it tends to go a little purple, but this works really well on your small areas. And then I'm going to go over here. I'm going to use a red paint pen. You could also use a Sharpie, so I'll show you. Here's a fine tip Sharpie. But this is a really easy way to fill in these small spots. These are Thule Art paint pens. They're extra fine tips. And I really like them. The only thing is, if there's a rough spot on your wood, sometimes they will spatter like that. You can just go in and clean it up. But this is what you want to do for your headlights or your tail lights. Those are tail lights. Okay, so the last step before I assemble them is I like to seal them. There's lots of different kinds of sealers you can use for these small pieces. I really like a product called DuraClear. DuraClear is my favorite thing for sealing my mini signs. It's just a quick application. It dries very, very fast, so you can seal them and pretty much immediately start putting them together. I love the finish. I love the way that it preserves the paint color. You can pack it away and pull it out the next year and it still looks just as vibrant. I do start with the new tape if I'm going to tape the pieces down, only because it's clean and free of paint dust. And you don't want to seal that paint dust into your mini sign pieces, okay? So just find a clean spot on my palette. My little palette lid. It's actually the lid to I bet like a paint palette brush. And then I start with my lightest color first. And it's just a quick application. I'm just going to brush it right over or rub it right over. This also eliminates brush strokes. So it's really fun or really easy. And then it also really makes your paint color pop. And it helps the wood grains pop too. It's just a really beautiful finish for your wood cutouts. So see right there where I had a little too much, just make sure you wipe it off, because if you don't, it's going to dry thick and it doesn't look good. Okay, we're just going to brush it. See how pretty that looks? And there you go. You can, if you want, you can always put a second coat over. I usually do one coat, but sometimes, the second coat is helpful. Okay, so I've got this sign painted and I just put it together. It's not glued yet, but I'll always tell you to put them together first to make sure you have all of your pieces in place and nothing is missing, because there's nothing worse than going to put your sign together and you realize you painted the wrong side or you're missing a piece, fell under the table. So once you have it all laid out, you've got it double checked, you know how everything goes, we've painted the right side of everything. We're going to start with the biggest piece first. And I use something called Gorilla Glue spray adhesive, and I turn a box top upside down and just spray right inside that box. You can use other paints too, or glues too, but this is just my favorite. It has a little give to it. And you can easily reposition, like scooch it just a little bit if you don't get your pieces exactly where you want them, okay? I'm going to put that there. Okay, so because the sunflowers rest on the rail of the truck, we're going to do the bumpers, this sign, and then we'll pop our sunflower in. So if you're using that Gorilla Glue, you want to spray just enough and then a little more than you think you need. And that's how you know. It does take about 10 minutes to fully cure. So once everything's assembled, you can flip it over upside down and set something heavy on it and let it cure all the way. You can even take your can of glue. I often do that. Just take the can of glue and pop it down. Another thing is if it's not all one layer, like if you don't have one layer, maybe you had another piece on top, you can use clamps. But you can take clamps. I use clamps from the Dollar Tree like this, and you can clamp it. See, it's another way to do it. But since this is going to be flat on one side, and there you go. There's our mini sign. So you can use this and lean it up against something in a tray. You can put like hot glue a piece of jute on the back and you can hang it. So many ways to display this, but it's just a fun little sign. I'd love to see pictures of yours if you make them. Post them and tag me.